not taking my chances. I sort of forgot how cold it gets when you're actually like flying on a bike at 35, 40 kilometers an hour. I'm not wearing enough at all. So I rode for 2 reasons today, because my shoulder's getting a lot better and I can. And I rode this bike because today I want to talk about gravel bikes and frame material. Okay, first I want to preface this video by saying that I'm not an expert in frame materials. I am not a professional rider. I'm not anything. But the thing is, videos of this nature tend to get a lot more views than my other ones from people who aren't really subscribers, people who found it from somewhere else. I'm just a guy who likes talking about bikes. This is kind of a forum where we all end up talking about the subject that I discuss in a video. And that's just sort of the way it goes. So with that said, let's talk about 3 different frame materials for gravel riding. So the first material that I'm going to explore for this video is steel. It's a material that we're all kind of familiar with. It's been around for years and years and years. There's a lot of beauty behind steel. It's a bit of an art to build a frame out of steel. It has a lot of history, there's a lot of different levels, and a lot of people will tell you that there's nothing better than riding a steel bike. It just has this certain feel to it that can't be rivaled by any other material. Now I can't really comment on it because I haven't really ridden a super nice steel bike, but I think when there's as many people as there is saying that there's no feeling like steel, then you kind of have to expect there's a little bit of merit to that comment. Steel's kind of a material that makes sense to me for like an adventure gravel touring bike. It's something that's readily accessible and easily fixed if anything ever happened to it. And if you spend the right amount of money, you can get into a bike that's stiff enough and light enough for what it is that you're trying to achieve with this whole like gravel riding type thing. I don't think steel's a material that you'd ever feel guilty about taking off-road and getting dirty. So the ride quality of steel is unrivaled, and it's not something that you'll ever cringe when you hear a rock come up and hit the down tube or any other part of it. It's just a worry-free material that's going to last the test of time. I think it's almost worth noting as well that I generally see a lot of older steel frames that seem to have lasted a lot longer over time than any other material. I don't think there's any type of bike that gets more abused than an old steel road bike ridden by someone who just doesn't know what they have. The second material to talk about is, of course, aluminum. Aluminum is a material that we can all afford. It's definitely the cheapest material that manufacturers can construct bikes out of. Aluminum's always been kind of given the title of being like the least comfortable of all the materials to ride, and that's probably true. It's definitely not the best material. I mean, it is plenty light, but it doesn't offer some of the better ride quality that other bikes do. And a lot of manufacturers do what they can to try and make the bikes more and more comfortable, but it really just can't say that it's as good as steel or as good as carbon. But the beauty is, it doesn't cost a whole lot of money. And aluminum technology just keeps getting better and better for them to build stiffer bikes and more comfortable bikes based on different hydroform tube shapes and different designs, just to make the bike flex a little bit more and add that ever-elusive vertical compliance. Aluminum frames aren't really a material that can be fixed if anything happens, but they're tough enough for everything that you're going to kind of throw at them. So aluminum's hardly the best, but it's definitely the most affordable, which makes it kind of my number one. Do I want it to be that way? No. It's definitely not as strong as carbon, it's definitely not as strong as steel, but the low cost kind of outweighs that anyway. And that's why most of my bikes are aluminum, because I can't afford super nice carbon bikes, I can't afford a really nice custom steel frame yet, so I have to split the difference if I want to have the amount of bikes that I have. Because it usually has such a low price tag, it's not something that you get too cringed or too worried about when you hear things hit it. For people like me who don't make a whole lot of money, aluminum is a fantastic material. You never feel guilty about ruining any of it. And finally, there's carbon. Pretty much the wonder material that every brand wants us to believe is the best and that there can't be anything better than. That kind of makes me sound like I don't like carbon. I do. It's just expensive, and if I can't afford it, I like to make fun of things. Carbon's kind of a material that has a bit of a reputation of like catastrophically failing, and a lot of people have a hard time kind of getting away from carbon's kind of dirty past. And I sort of include myself in that. So thankfully for this video, I actually I have a section of down tube from an old carbon frame. This is probably about a 4-year-old piece, and you know, this is going to be kind of the spot on a frame that is actually going to get hit by rocks or anything while gravel riding. So I'm going to hit it with a hammer and see how well it holds up. So after a brutal beating with a heavy ball hammer, yes, this section of down tube did eventually fail, but it's not like it blew up into a million pieces. It just kind of started like cracking and deteriorating where I was hitting it really hard numerous times. Really, the way this fared out, if it was a complete bike altogether, you would probably still be able to ride home on this. It wouldn't feel great, but it would get you home. That particular section is from a lightweight road frame. And on lightweight road frames, of course, the carbon's going to be a little bit thinner so that the bike is lighter because they're really not thinking that you're going to be riding through anything that's going to have a lot of stuff coming up and hitting it. And I would just kind of expect that any carbon frame specifically designed to be riding gravel would have a thicker layer of carbon there so that it's stronger to prevent any sort of damage if a rock did kind of fly up. And based on my test alone, you would need to have a pretty massive rock come up, hit it at a pretty hard force to have any sort of real damage happen. So in my opinion, a carbon frame getting any sort of damage from like rocks flying up and debris is actually kind of a non-issue. There's that unfair misconception about carbon fiber that you're going to have catastrophic failure with it all the time. And I think that that little test with that down tube really does drive home the point that carbon is significantly tougher than we all kind of think it is. The stories of the past are no more, and you really need not be worried about riding off-road in any sort of terrible conditions with a carbon bike anymore. And the real beauty of a carbon bike that would be specifically designed for gravel riding or adventuring is that there's no material in there that can rust, and you're never going to have any problems with it. So at the end of this, I know that you're all kind of wondering what material would I like to have a bike made out of, and really the answer to that is a nice steel. I'd love to have a nice steel bike that I can do everything on, a lot like my buddy Ian's Fluent that you've seen on the channel or on my Instagram a couple times. Making this video is fun. Just hitting things with hammers to prove a point. I can't necessarily say that I was surprised that carbon is that strong, because I've watched videos about people like trying to break it, and I hit that thing like 20 times before it really started flattening out. So really the takeaway from this is like, don't be afraid of any material. You can ride anything you want. And just kind of reinforces, ride within your means, don't spend more money than you need to just to give someone else some bike envy. This is the bike that I ride for gravel riding. It's nothing groundbreaking, but I have a ton of fun on it. So make sure you do the same. So with all that, I'm gonna go.